day.
Yeah, I think Paul does not want to go winless this season. He very nearly did last season, but came away with the championship just because he was so consistent across the board. But his success kind of leaves us with some questions about Jared Thomas. He's still down in 6th overall, 5th in class, and he's usually been the one with the one-lap pace and just race pace in general all season long. So not sure if Jared just isn't clicking with this track or if maybe he's had some sort of issues.
That's a good question. 8 poles on the season for Jared Thomas. You're right. His single lap pace has been outstanding, and then he's backed it up with all those wins. In fact, he's won all but 2 of the races so far this season, which is why he comes in with a nearly insurmountable lead. Perhaps there's just an element of risk aversion here on the part of Jared. He knows he just needs to run and take the start, really, in race 1, and he should have it pretty much locked up headed into race 2 tomorrow, which would be a good position for him to be in. He's been a busy guy as of late. He was one of a number of the drivers in this series that headed over to Belgium and took part in a 12-hour all Porsche 992 Cup endurance race at the Spa-Francorchamps circuit just a few weeks ago, and he was one that was there and had some success, certainly getting to sample one of the great racetracks anywhere on the planet.
Watching Mike Mim for a bit, really giving you an idea of the elevation change around here that the drivers deal with. There's many blind corners, which could be an issue when we get to the race if we have any drivers go off like we saw at the top of the hill. In fact, yesterday there had to be a red flag thrown simply because one of the cars was parked there on the outside of the track and they didn't have a clear view of when they could enter safely. So they gave them an opening simply by stopping the traffic for them, and eventually they were able to get going. So anybody who finds themselves in one of those blind corners not where the car should be might have a little bit of a difficult time.
This is Scott Bland. We were talking about the Masters Championship situation coming in to the weekend, and this is big for him right now, 3rd in class. The 2 drivers in front of him, Rob Walker mathematically in the championship conversation, Caden Kelly making a one-off, not someone he needs to really be concerned with. Scott doing a really nice job here, and what a run he's been on to take the points lead coming into the weekend. The last 4 races, no finish worse than 2nd, Joe, and he's won 3 of those, including a sweep of the weekend at Watkins Glen. And that was after a bit of a mid-season swoon that left him in a dire predicament from a points perspective, but he's clawed his way back into it and has a really good chance to come away with a hard-earned title here this weekend.
And I think he really wants that title, so he's going to be working hard for this one. He was looking very good in practice. They set their release here in the qualifying session based on practice times, and I believe he was in the top 5 on that one. But he's currently down in 8th. That said, he is sitting 3rd in the points. One thing to remember is that we have 2 races in every series this weekend except for the endurance series. So this isn't over come the next race. So the math is still going to be a little difficult with them being so close. I can tell you that 3rd or better for Scott in the race 1 will leave him leading the championship going into the final race. So that's the way to think of that one. For the likes of Bowden, that means that essentially he's got to finish at least on the podium to try and cut in, most likely, and put himself in a position where he could try and take this title away from him. Those 2, I am sure, are going to be giving it 10/10ths all weekend.
Mark right now nipping at the heels of Scott Blend. Scott did just jump Rob Walker the last time by to get up to 2nd in class. That's a big deal for Scott. So now Bowden needs to up the ante. He's got about 0.6 of a second to find relative to this car, Scott Blend. I love the paint scheme. It helps our job. We know exactly who we're looking at as soon as the car comes on the screen, and this is part of a family effort designing the livery for Scott's cars. They are unmissable.
Exactly. Yes, I believe one of his nieces, if I remember correctly, designed the car for him, and she did a fantastic job, that is for sure, as he comes down into the chicane himself to see if maybe he can get a little bit closer to Kelly. It's another case where with Caden not being involved in the championship, It's not the worst thing in the world for Scott if he has to start behind Caden, but I'm sure he'd like the most points he can possibly get. Had a couple penalties here in qualifying. The 297 had a pit lane speed violation, so they'll get a drive-through. And then the 268, so already a couple drivers not quite doing what they're supposed to out there. And 297 is Conrad Geis. That's a bit of a surprise since he's had all this season to really get accustomed to all he needs to do with this being his first professional season of racing. And I would think that's a little bit of a simple mistake to make.
Yeah, maybe it's a case, though, of just not having the pit speed limiter quite set at the right rate. I mean, you've had a couple of days of testing to get that dialed in, so it does come as a bit of a surprise. Maybe it was just not getting the timing right at pit entry. But in any case, that drive-through penalty, a bit of a setback, but Conrad's done a nice job here in qualifying, 6th overall, 5th in class. Couple of changes at the top of the leaderboard. Bocuse and Johnson still 1-2, but Ashley Freiberg just went to 3rd a few moments ago. Thomas is up to 4th in class and 5th overall, and a little bit closer to that front group than he had been. So he did find a bit more speed, did Jared Thomas, as he looks to clinch a title here this weekend.
Those that were used to watching Jared in the previous races earlier on in the season will find it a little bit more familiar, but slightly different because he's got the star-spangled paint scheme back on the car, but kind of updated it. He unfortunately had to write off one of his cars earlier in the season when he got into a wreck with Ashley Freiberg and Paul Bocuse at Watkins Glen, and all three of them kind of had to regroup. Both Ashley and Jared had to start a new tub, start a new chassis, and get out there and try again. So that definitely was a big setback for them, but seemed to have taken it pretty well as we watch with Gilliland coming around to the fearsome turn 10 that leads you down into the braking for the hairpin. And here we go through that final right-hander to complete the lap. Let's see if this is going to be clean and fast.
You can see on this onboard shot just how bright that sun is here this morning, and it's right in the driver's eyes. Look how difficult that is. It's bad on the camera. It's even worse for the driver. Coming up the hill here, it's a blind corner anyway. This is truly blind. You can't see anything as he comes to the top of the hill. Gilliland doing a nice job, though. Continues to push, 5th in points coming into the weekend as 3 podiums on the season, including a couple runner-up finishes. Looking for his first win, though, here on the final weekend of the 2024 campaign.
About 2.5 minutes left to go, so time is running out. Just under 1:40 for lap time, so drivers who are crossing now have probably about 2 laps to try and wrap this one up. Just saw Johnson come up to 9th overall, and that will actually put an even bigger gap between Blend and Bowden. Now they've got Walker and Johnson between the two of them. That's bad news for Mark.
Yeah, that's what he was looking for. You know, we talked about a midseason swoon for Scott Blend. It's really not been a good last couple of weekends for Bowden. Did have the one podium finish, a 3rd in race 2 at Road America, but other than that, finishes a 5th and 4th and 6th in the last 4 races on the backs of sweeping the weekend out at VIR, and that's left him with this deficit despite a really strong start to the year, which saw him on the podium in all but 2 of the first 8 races. So it's a tough spot to be in. Don't know how much experience Mark has out here at Sonoma. I suspect he would have run the SCCA runoffs out here when they were here in 2018, I think that was. But I'd have to check my notes on that. But that said, another one of these Midwest, East Coast guys that probably doesn't make that long tow out to the California area all that often.
Just saw Gilliland rather, jump up into 12th overall. I was kind of watching that because his first 2 sectors were looking great. Didn't really wow on the last sector, but he was on a flyer, and that helped him tremendously because I believe he was down around 18th before that overall. That'll put him into, I believe, 6th in class for the Masters. So definitely a significant bit of time found. Now less than a minute left to go as we watch them fly down out of the carousel And then somebody's coming into pit lane, a couple drivers heading into pit lane, feeling that's the best they can do.
To put a bow on the Mark Bowden conversation, he indeed did run in the SCCA runoffs here back in 2018, was national runner-up in the T2 class, driving a Porsche Carrera S that year, but also raced in GT2 and T1 for the Fall Line team, a couple different classes in the national championships of amateur road racing here in North America. But it's worth noting that was before the repave, and a lot of folks have said that repave that was done over the winter in preparation for this 2024 season has changed this track a whole lot. Things you thought you knew about the place, some of those nuances that the locals had built up and accumulated over the years, maybe that doesn't apply quite in the same way that it used to, unless you've been out here running a bunch on this new track surface. Nevertheless, checkered flag is out. Couple of cars still finishing up flyers, but provisionally it looks like a fourth pole this season for Paul Bocuse. Could this be the weekend he breaks through for his first win in the Cup cars?
Certainly looking like he and Janson are going to have to try and fight over that one as we get a couple more cars just crossing the line. Washington tries to improve, but doesn't look like he was able to make a faster lap that time by. Then, of course, we have Ammon crossing the line, and he also, unfortunately, doesn't find anything on that last time around. I think that's going to be it for our drivers completing laps, so we can call it to the unofficial results at this point for our GT3 Cup qualifying. And this is going to be a fun one once we get to the race with what is in store. One of the closest fights in any of the championships that we have for that Masters title. And thankfully, only 2 penalties in that entire session. So it looks like drivers have really got themselves to behave well this time. Let's take a look at our results on that one as the safety team gives the once-over on the circuit, going along to make sure that everything is in order out there. And as we said, Paul Bocuse is currently our quickest driver in that session out of anybody, as well as the pole for the Pro-Ams in his 271 machine. Probably hungry to try and take home that victory. Then it is Aaron Janson who will be starting next to him. Ashley Freiberg with an excellent 3rd place. And Caden Kelly starting in 4th. The pole sitter for our Masters class. Jared Thomas still only down in 5th, but as Ryan said, could be just trying to bring this one home. Conrad Geis is 6th with Scott Blend 7th and Rob Walker in at the P8 position. Joel Johnson and Mark Bowden round out your top 10.
Big development late in the going in the 991 class. Tony Melito took class pole, and he's got a healthy gap. 2 cars out of class between himself and Niels Meissner in 2nd. That's 16th and 19th overall on the road there, as you could see. That's one to keep an eye on. Really, really cool battle going on there in the 991 class. Not a ton of cars as we get deeper into the season, but a really good fight between those two that's been raging since we got the season started back in Sebring, rather.
Well, that wraps up our qualifying for the GT3 Cup. We've got more action coming on later today as the Porsche Sprint Challenge North America Cayman Series heads out for their qualifying at 10:20 a.m. Pacific time. I'm Joe Peak here with Ryan Marine. Thanks for joining us. Race clean, race hard, and we'll see you on the track.